Welcome back to All Outdoors Photography Podcast, where we share experiences on the field and educate others through landscapes, wildlife, macro, and more, with photographers from around the world.
And for today's episode, we have Karl Yost on the show. Welcome to the show, Karl.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you're a nature photographer based out of Yellow Springs, Ohio. Let's go ahead and begin by telling your start with photography, and you had a point-and-shoot camera, and then going towards where you are today.
Sure. I guess it seems like most photographers, we all started with some small camera when we were a kid, and I'm no different. My older brothers, had a dark room in our basement, and I was kind of always interested in what they were doing. And as I got older, got my first camera, and it just kind of progressed from there. And did some stuff through my late teens, and then I kind of stopped for a while. Getting a career and having other pursuits, and it wasn't until about 20 years of IT work that I've decided that was enough of that, and I've kind of reignited my love of photography and really threw myself back into it. And that kind of takes us up to where I've been the last few years, and just re-exploring that. I've always been involved with photography a little bit here and there, but just more on the side of having some fun and not really going out and exploring too hard. But that all changed.
That's really cool. Yeah. So how has working in the background with IT, how's it played a part in photography, if it has at all?
Probably the best part is I've never had a situation where I've not had backups, because I've spent a lot of time dealing with backups in my IT career. So you tend to hear a lot of photographers with horror stories about not having any kind of backup system. So I've protected myself from there. And then just tech, especially with our digital cameras now, right? All our DSLRs and mirrorless and everything. And we no longer really have a dark room. Everything's digital, or Lightroom, as you want to call it. So being already tech focused, it was very easy to transition into using the software and the computers and the programs for that. I haven't been in a dark room in very, very, very long time, but it would be fun to get back into that at some point. But IT was a good base for that, so that's an easy segue to move from one into the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So kind of leading off of that question, would you consider yourself more a technical or an artistic photographer?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say I'm in a transition period, because there's obviously the very technical side of photography, but I've been leaning more and more into the creative side of things, and really trying to dig into those pieces and find the things that interest me, and really pursue those where it might not necessarily be for everybody. Some of the stuff I shoot, but it works for me, and I think it has a little bit more of a creative flair than the straight technical stuff that maybe I used to do, just trying to get fast moving objects and exploring movement, and whether it be in sports or just everyday traffic kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's photography is great because it marries the two, where it's you got the technical side of it and the creative side, and the left and right hand brain. It works out real well for I guess balancing those two aspects of people too.
Agreed. It takes, I think, after so much time in IT, you tend to lose a little bit of that creative piece that you maybe had, or if you don't, it's a muscle. If you don't exercise that creative muscle, then it tends to start getting weak and fall away, and you kind of have to tune back into that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely a balance. So yeah, maybe about the aspect, because a lot of your work's in nature, of course. How did that come into play here?
Largely because of running. I was doing a lot of running, and like to do trail running, and I just like to be out and see what was happening. And one day is different than the next, and the seasons change, and then I start getting interested in slowing down a little bit and looking a little bit closer. And as you know, running with any kind of serious camera gear isn't really practical. So it turned into doing more hikes and just kind of exploring nature and being out and looking at things a little bit differently instead of running by them.
Yeah, definitely.
So are you kind of returning to the same locations, or are you always out hiking, kind of trying to find new spots? What's your approach?
Well, it varies. There's a few things like so I have ideas in my mind of like, I really want to shoot this, or there's always those locations that give you trouble that you can't get quite the right image. So there's some that I'm always returning to because I'm still trying to get what I want out of it and haven't succeeded yet. And there's but then there's always that looking for new stuff. And of course, that was a bit of a problem with when we were going through the pandemic of going too far from being able to find things. But so I was exploring mostly just around the Yellow Springs area, which luckily we have so many parks and great places to get in the trails to go around. So I would definitely like to start expanding out and away from the area a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I mean, Yellow Springs has some amazing parks and trails and just places that are very photogenic to hike in and just, photograph, of course, too. So, like, what are some of your recommendations for people that visit that area?
Well, I think if you're up for a fun hike and you don't mind a long hike, a lot of people don't realize that Glen Helen is actually connected to John Bryan, and you can actually hike through from one to the other. And I think that's a great thing to do, and because there's so much to see. The trails are a little less used, so it's a lot of fun to get out there. And one of my other favorite areas is actually called the South Glen, which is off of Grinnell Road, kind of close to where the Grinnell Mill is. There's a little parking lot there. I think it maybe holds 4 or 5 cars, and there's a little bit of a trail back there that you can go and hike, and it doesn't get a lot of use, but it's still a kind of a nice, unique area.
Yeah, that whole section's really underappreciated, the South Glen, that is. I mean, they have that covered bridge that I think they recently restored, or not restored, but they repainted because it had tons of graffiti over it. But yeah.
Yeah, they did. And that was kind of, that's the old, I think that's the old Cemetery Road covered bridge, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that they had moved over there at one point. But yeah, it had gotten tons of graffiti, but that's a nice set of paths back there. And of course you come to the backside of the riding center there too, which is kind of cool. So if the horses are out there to check up on you.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's definitely an underappreciated spot. Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of subject are you looking for when you hit these trails?
I'm big into paths. I like just the trail or the single paths with. I typically don't have people in my scenes. I think there's only a handful of that I actually have done that. I like a lot of individual landscapes, single trees or just a few trees or really isolated objects in nature. And then I like kind of the other end of that is just kind of a sweeping landscape, something that's where you mind kind of wanders out to the horizon, and you can kind of get lost or kind of transported there a little bit in the photo. So those are the things I'm after. Sometimes it works out better than others, as you know. And then sometimes it's the macro photography, getting really close into things is also something I like doing. It's a little frustrating. I don't know if you guys have found the same when you're trying to share that stuff online, is a lot of the detail gets lost. You really need to see it, printed in a much bigger fashion to really appreciate some of what you capture there. A Facebook or an Instagram post doesn't really quite do it justice when you're posting those to share. So those are a little bit more frustrating as far as sharing your work, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. It's like, especially with macro, from a technical standpoint, you got like, if you don't focus stack, or if even if you don't know like your focusing point pretty well, like when you're taking the image, it's hard to nail that really in the final, I guess output. So that can also be hard to translate with like image editing too.
Agreed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so is there like what kind of like themes I guess do you like to share in your work? You mentioned a little bit about how you want to transport people like with a horizon line into the frame, but like is there any other specific like I guess ideas or themes you want to share?
Yeah, there's a reoccurring theme in a lot of my stuff is individuality or being solo, if you will, or some kind of an isolation type of theme tends to run throughout. I've been approaching more and more black and white as I've been moving forward, just because I've been a little bit more interested in uh, the structure of the contrast that I think comes through a little bit better than always shooting color. I still like shooting in color, obviously, but the mix of the two is kind of where I'm at, leaning a little bit more towards the black and white right now.
And will you shoot like directly for black and white, or will you decide when you get back to the computer?
It varies. There's been a few times where I take a shot and then I look at it when I get back and I'm like, something doesn't quite feel right, and it feels better in a black and white. And then there's been other times where I've seen things where I immediately knew I want this black and white. And one of those which I did a couple shots up at Antioch College here in town, and it was one of those mornings where we still kind of had a low fog or mist hanging over the area. It was had some cloudy skies, and it was just very ominous looking, and I knew right away it was going to be the perfect black and white image, for instance, that just worked perfectly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, black and white's great just because it like evokes a certain mood that you just don't get with color sometimes, and that like when you strip away the color and you're just left with shadow and light detail and contrast, it can really produce some really cool results like that too.
I think it causes your brain to try to fill in and look at things a little bit differently, because we're so used to everything being colorized, and when you're forced with looking at that image, then you kind of try to fill in the blanks of what those colors might have been. Takes a little bit of a different meaning.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like a lot of color images, kind of like pull people's eyes towards them a lot more just because they're so much brighter. But like black and white kind of allows a more contemplative feel maybe with it.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned about your basically doing the trail running, and that kind of got you into hiking and doing the photography more. And then with the IT stuff, where it's just kind of like a nice break from it. But were there any like big photographer inspirations starting out or even now?
I'm kind of all over the board. There's a lot of photographers I really like. One of my favorites recently has been Saul Leitner. Did I say that right? Is one that's I like a lot of his work, and he's got some of his, I can't remember the name of his photo book, but his is one that I really enjoy quite a bit. But a lot of the photographers that I like to look at their work are not in the same vein as I shoot. And it's not intentional, it just seems to be the way it ends up. But I feel like for a lot of my work, I kind of know what I want to go shoot, and so I don't want to say spoil it, but I don't want to get too much influence from other people's work, and I like to try to play around with mine, and because I've certainly seen stuff where I've been second guessing, like did I do this because I saw this other image, and you worry about just trying to copy, which everything is always going to be a little bit different, but I try to keep the stuff I shoot a little bit unique. So I think every photographer out there that's taking stuff that's sharing it is got something beneficial and useful to say that we can all take from, whether they're a huge name or just somebody starting out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's tough nowadays when literally everyone has a camera, like in this instance, like their phones in their pockets. But like, it's hard to like differentiate yourself. And I really respect that where you say it's like you try to maybe shy away from looking at other people's work just because it will influence you more, and you're really honest and open about it. But yeah, how has like really seeing other people's work that's maybe outside of your genre helped influence your nature photography?
I think a lot of it comes down to seeing how other people have handled color or black and white. Really, it could be either, and seeing somebody who took a different approach or had a different idea. And some of the best photos, as you guys know, especially from some of the older photos, are not the sharp. They're not pin sharp, right? They've got grain in them. They're a little bit noisy. They might not have a perfect focus, but they're still a good photo. And I think those type of things in general have helped me think about it doesn't have to be a technical perfect photo. I mean, sure, we like it if it's sharp, but sometimes you can convey a message without it being incredibly sharp, or if it has a little bit of grain, whether it's from being in a film or a high ISO from whatever you had to shoot, or there's a little bit of movement. Sometimes a little bit of movement is fine too. I don't mind seeing a subject move in an image. There's a image I have called Alone, which is just a single cow out in a field in a single tree at sunrise. But it's got a little bit, it's technically in focus, but it's got a little bit of movement to it. And I think that just a little bit extra motion helps convey a little bit different of a meaning to the image. It kind of similar to when you start, introducing. I know, Ryan, that you do the ICM, and it changes, how you're looking at things, and you can sometimes, depending on how intense the ICM is, you can figure out what the image was initially, or you're left there pondering. So I think that all those avenues are quite interesting.
I think that's awesome. Yeah, and it's definitely, when you talk about the motion blur too, it's more natural to the human eye, and I think it can bring out a lot of emotions too. And that was kind of the next question I wanted to ask you, and this might be a harder one, but what is like some emotions you try to convey through your photography?
It kind of goes back to that my previous answer, I think, and that is a lot of it is one. I don't think we covered it on the Ryan has met me in person, but you haven't, Henry. I'm very tall. I'm 6'8", so I tend to stick out a lot, and so looking at things, especially with the macro work and getting low and looking up, not only does it change my perspective, but I hope that it brings a different perspective to other people. So that's one thing, is just providing a different view of the world around us. And then going back to the other answer is just the feeling of isolation and being alone. I think it's very important to be able to spend time with yourself and be okay being alone, and being there with your thoughts. And I like having that peaceful and that tranquil part about an image, and especially, as you guys know, when you're out shooting in nature and everything's quiet and you can just all the senses start activating with the sight, the smell, the temperatures, and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I definitely agree with you. I identify with that isolation aspect of photography. I feel like it's like when I create my best work, most of the time at least, is like when I'm alone, so I can just focus solely on the task at hand. Do you ever go out and like shoot with other people sometimes? And if so, how does that play into, I guess, photo shooting?
I don't like shooting with other people, and it's purely because I feel bad. And I'm sure you guys know how it is. Like you're walking around and looking at a scene, and you're taking this shot. I'm like, well, I think I like a little bit better over here. And I hate holding people up, and I don't want to, keep people back from continuing on, especially if they're not particularly shooting or they're not interested in the same subject matter. So that's a little bit of a personal hurdle to overcome, because people would generally say no, it's fine. It's like, well, it's not. I feel like I'm taking up your time and you're not really interested in doing it. So I recently was in Colorado last fall, visiting a friend, and he was taking me around, and we were driving out into the mountains, and we would stop here and there and take photos. And I probably could have spent a good hour and a half at some of the locations, but I felt guilty keeping him kind of held off, especially since he was my driver. I didn't want to make him mad. So that's kind of, I find it a little difficult shooting with other people. And I have found on the few times when I've shot with other photographers, I think we as a group tend to like scatter and kind of go off on our own a little bit, and then we kind of seem to meet back up at the end. So it still seems to end up being a little bit alone.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's almost maybe the best approach, really, is you meet up for like the same goal or theme, like photography, of course, but then you do kind of split up like that. I just feel like it yields better results, and you may have unique experiences you can share when you meet back up, but it's also your photos are going to be different too, which is a lot better.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I want to circle back to actually with your height. I'm curious. Weird question, but how often do you shoot from just standing straight up? I know you do a lot of macro work, but like, how often do you shoot just from your view, I guess, of the world?
Quite often. Even for quite a while, I went out and I had bought a tripod that could accommodate me not having to bend over, which was kind of a big deal. Finding one that would go high enough, and still be sturdy. But I do shoot from that. I find that a lot of times though that I end up not liking the shot, and maybe that's because it's what I'm used to seeing, and it doesn't necessarily convey something different than I was looking for. I find I tend to have it kind of is more of a less pleasing angle to the eye when it's kind of straight from my eye level. And even though I am tall, I don't think it adds enough difference in perspective to the image. A lot of my better images for landscape stuff, I think, has been when I've actually crouched down and then shooting more from taking a knee kind of position.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely fair. Yeah. So a large part of your portfolio, like you mentioned, is macro and small scene. Like maybe what kind of subjects are you shooting in that kind of style, and just maybe your process with shooting those.
Sure. So it varies. There's a few things that I really like to do. The first is during the winter, as you know, our in Ohio, it's in a lot of places. There's not a great amount of landscape to shoot, in my opinion, because it's a lot of gray skies and barren fields, and there's only so much you can do with that. So I've kind of approached doing some of the colder weather work, if you will, as a kind of a little bit more abstract. There's an image called Bird's Nest, which is what do they call it? Queen Anne's lace, and it's dead, but it's not very sharp. It's got a little bit of focus on it, but it comes out being more abstract, which I think is a little bit more fitting. And then the kind of the complete opposite end of that, there's another image that I have, Morning Dew Echinacea, that is I think that's 38 shots. So it's stacked to get all those pieces in, and there's a little bit of water dew on it, and the background, there was quite a bit of shadow, so I was really able to pop out the pop out the flower and see the detail on the petals. So it really can kind of run both sides of that. I typically look for something that's a little bit different or has a little bit different of a look that I haven't seen, and a lot of it is taking the shot of something I think that's interesting, and then waiting until I get back to the edit and see, is there actually something here? Sometimes I run into little surprises, and sometimes it's just turns into a throwaway.
Interesting. Yeah. So you'll try to kind of get the most information in camera versus, trying to get that like perfect like exposure that you don't adjust. Is that try to get more data on that side?
It kind of, I find it very difficult. I think it's a little bit easier in the mirrorless world than the DSLR world was, to judge the back of the camera, looking at the screen to see what the image looks like. Even zooming in or whatnot, I don't like those small screens and trying to take a look at the image, and especially with the macro work. I find it definitely can find out if it's sharp or whatnot, and that gets it. But I need to kind of see the whole and be able to see in a little bit larger of a view to see if it's got an actual scene that I like, so to speak.
Right.
So it really does vary. I like to get. I don't do a lot of stacking. It has to be, one, I have to have my tripod and have the time to set up and, get all that. There's sometimes where that's more practical than others, and I'll do a bunch of those. And of course, as you guys know, that stacking can take forever, especially you import them, then you got to apply everything and then try to go through and stack them, and a lot of computational time, and then if it doesn't work out and you got to go back and make corrections, I don't know that it's worth the amount of effort that can go into it.
Right. Yeah. So maybe if you could, for people that aren't familiar with focus stacking, like what exactly is it? And like, is it just mainly to achieve clarity throughout the image, or is there something more to it, I guess?
Sure. So the basic principle is when you're doing macro work, you're working with a very shallow depth of field. And so if you want to have an image in focus from front to back with that shallow depth of field, you're going to have to take a bunch of images at different focusing points, and then you cram all those images together so that only the in focus parts are shown, and then everything else is blown out in that nice shallow depth of field. And so it's gotten a lot easier because a lot of cameras actually now have a setting in it that you can go and flip on. I know I shoot Canon, and the Canon has a nice setting to go in, and you can set how many images you want and a couple other parameters, and then it just fires through them all. And then you have a nice grouping, and then you can go back and try to edit them. So it's better than it used to be, where you would have to manually kind of focus, take the shot, manually focus, take the shot, which was a lot more consuming and time consuming. And then, as soon as any of the light changes, then it starts introducing more issues, because then you got to try and correct one image for light that's a little bit different than the other, and so on. So,
how many shots do you tend to take in those macro sequences?
The most I've ever done was 150.
Wow.
Well, it was because I wanted to see what would happen, right? It was like, is more actually better? And really, it seems to me that, especially if it's going to be like the flower stuff that I have out there, somewhere between 20 and 40 is kind of the sweet spot I have found. Anything over 50 seems to be a little bit overkill. And it goes back to your scene. If you had a longer scene, I could see that, making more of a difference. But yeah.
What was the subject that you shot that 150 images for?
Oh boy, I don't know the name of the flower. It did not turn out after all of that work. It was it was going to take way too much time to try and correct. It was this purple flower. I never looked up what it was called. It was kind of a ball looking type thing with all these different pieces on it. It would have been very cool if I could have gotten it focus stacked, but I tried in a couple different programs doing the focus stacking. It just was not getting the results. It ended up just not being able to pick out the detail and get things. And I didn't have the patience to try to do that manually. That's just too rough.
I imagine there's probably some variation in movement. With that many shots, there's quite the interval between that first one and the last one as well.
Yeah, that's where the newer cameras really save you a lot of work, is because it can fire them off really well, depending on your light, of course. But if you can have a fast shutter speed, you can fire them off really quickly and avoid some of that movement. But you absolutely hit it with 150 shots. The slightest little breeze comes through, and then you get an image that's kind of just a little bit off, and then so you try to align that and stack it correctly, but sometimes you gotta throw those out and then keep going and recompile, so to speak.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you use a focusing rail at all? Seems like you're pretty technical with macro and everything.
I do have one. And to be honest, it's a little bit heavy, so my pack is already heavy enough, so I usually don't take it with me when I go out, and I rely on just using the camera to especially now with the having the settings in the camera where it can just focus itself. I rely on that instead of carrying the focusing rail.
Do you use a tripod at all when you do macro?
Yeah, almost all the time.
Okay.
Unless it's something like that bird's nest image that I mentioned before. That was a winter day. I saw that and the sky was cool, so I crouched down and took one shot, and it just worked. So, but most of the time it's I use a tripod.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard a few people using or shooting macro and handheld. I don't know how they do it. It's like, just seems impossible to me, but besides the point. Yeah.
It's much easier, especially now with all the, it seems like all the new cameras have image stabilization, which almost kind of feels like cheating. It gets you those extra stops of light that you can go through and really get away with doing a lot more handheld than you used to be able to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for
sure. Yeah, so maybe shifting gears here a little bit to landscapes now. What's like your process with shooting those, and what subjects do you look out for?
I like shooting. So there's a couple of things. One, big fan of sunrise. Don't really get out to sunsets very much, so sunrise is typically where a lot of my stuff takes place. I love seeing that light come into a scene. I really enjoy where you have part of the landscape, and not dark, but the light has not yet fallen on it. You're not getting that sun overhead. So that's one thing I kind of look for. The others would be still looking for clean horizons, or interesting textures within the horizons, where maybe you have a field, and then you have whether it could be a tall grass and then trees behind it, and then another layer of trees. There's an image that's probably it kind of surprised me. I've gotten the most feedback probably of it than a lot of my images, called Monotone Morning, and it was taken just here in town at the Riding Center, overlooking the field, and it's kind of, I guess, a pretty easy study in black and white, as far as it's got a very dark point at the bottom, and then a mid-tone, and then a very bright spot, and it's 3 different layers of textures, and it just all came together beautifully. That's one of those ones where I knew it was going to be black and white when I took it. The color image, I tried to process it anyway, just see what it looked like, and it just doesn't work, and it's pretty ugly. But that's one of those things where the time of year comes into play here in Ohio too, right? So,
like you mentioned earlier with winter, it's like, especially in Ohio, it's just blank gray skies and just barren fields. Everything just feels really desolate. So it's like black and white almost kind of fits the mood, I guess, in a way too.
It does. It feels like for those 4 months or whatever we're living in black and white to a certain degree, especially with
Sure.
the gray clouds. And uh, I've been trying to um, get the yellow spring in fall, and I've missed it every year at hitting the colors just right for when it's happening. I've gotten it in the winter with snow, and I've gotten it, spring and summer, but I've never gotten a really good fall picture because our colors seem to, if you're not available the one day that the colors are going to hit, it seems the next day we get rain and wind and all the leaves are gone, right? So uh, that's one of my reoccurring themes that I always have to stop by and take a look at anytime I hike through there.
Right. I think you and me both, honestly. I don't think I've shot that in fall, the Yellow Springs itself. So is there any like shots that you like, how many of your shots, I guess, are pre-planned or you have like, I guess, a composition in mind and versus just ones where you just go out in the field and just see what may come your way, I guess?
Uh, Probably, I would say probably 20% maybe are planned. There's a few areas that I know, like if the weather is going to be, you know, uh, cloudy or we have a fog or a mist come in, uh, I will make a plan to go and hit those areas because I've been wanting to photograph that subject. I think the softness of the weather will help it. But mostly it's going out to an area. I find I try to walk when like if hiking in the Glen, you can hike to the pine forest. I try to hike the exact same route back. There's some deviations you can take because uh, sometimes the best shot's behind you and you don't see that till you're on the way back. So I like to get both directions when I go, and so sometimes it's just experimenting and finding, and sometimes nature helps you and drops a tree or has new growths or whatnot that really help bring things in.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I feel like, at least for me, I'd be really impatient seeing the same trails and backtracking it. But that's really great, just I guess perspective on how to find new compositions and photos that way.
It's we tend to you tend to think when you're walking forward that you've seen what's already behind you, but in reality, I feel like it's a very different view when you start facing the other way. So it's those little details I think can make a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. Uh,
Yeah. So I'm curious. I know you mentioned cloudy skies, but what is kind of the lighting you tend to seek out? Is it cloudy days, or do you like going out early or in the evenings, or what's your approach there?
Um, Mornings is my favorite time to go out. I really like being there when that first bit of light comes up. So actually, I guess still when it's dark out would be ideal time for me to leave. And then there's something about experiencing that morning light, seeing the sunrise and things start coming through, uh, is my preferred time. The clouds, I find skies very challenging sometimes with because a lot of times it seems that I end up with just a crystal clear blue sky, which is beautiful to look at, but it doesn't do much in the way of photography you kind of need, especially when you're doing landscapes. I feel like you need a little bit of something in the sky, or else it gets a little too kind of washed out in a lot of negative space. So, but I have done some images that I've been really happy with where the sky has been just perfectly clear. So it can, it's a challenge, but I think it's anything can work.
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah, even harsh lights sometimes, noon. Sometimes it works out. It's not definitely not as high of a turnover rate, but if you're out there, something will show up eventually.
Absolutely. I think going out in the harsh light, I think it gets a bad name, really. I mean, I do like getting out and going early, but I think that especially if you're going to be hiking trails and you're going to be in the woods and the forest, that harsh light can really be beneficial to you with your photos and can create some interesting shadows and light coming through as the sun moves around.
Yeah, definitely. And that midday light, like you said, a lot of people shirk it and they just quite frankly won't shoot it at all. But like if you go out with the predestined idea of like, oh, I'm going to shoot black and white, that's like the perfect time to do it when it's the sun's highest point in the sky, but it's creating all those dramatic
Sure.
shadows and contrasts. Yeah. Yeah, so you've also done a fair bit of like aerial and drone photography. So maybe could you tell us about the process of getting certified a little bit and what types of photos you like to shoot?
So that was more. I wish I have done more as of recently, and it's just something I've not been back at lately. Um, the certification just came because when I jump into something, I like to learn about it and know the pieces and be able to get as much out of it as possible. I figured, so let's go all the way in, and uh, you know, it seemed like the requirements were going to get stricter and stricter. So I figured anytime there's a chance to get in on the early level and then get grandfathered in maybe for future changes in the law is always, it makes life a little bit easier. So the process actually was very simple, and I think it's gotten easier, quite frankly, because they've moved a large portion of it online. It used to be that you had to go into a testing center and be monitored while you took the test and all that. And I believe it's been moved online. At least the reoccurring part to renew has been moved online. Um, but with a little bit of studying, all my studying I learned from uh, Tony Northup's video. He did like an hour and a half YouTube video on what you needed to learn for the test. I used that I think I probably watched that once or twice, and then I picked up an app on my phone just to do study prep with. And once you get the basics down, it was actually pretty easy to go through and get the certification. And then you're still limited. It doesn't give you the right to go flying at an airport or anything, which would be fun, I guess, in a way too, right? To be able to get aerial shots of airports, but there's still limitations about airspace and whatnot that you have to pay attention to. So it's not a free pass by any means, but it does open up a little bit more, especially if you want to make money for it. Technically speaking, if you're doing any kind of commercial drone work where you're going to make money off of that footage, whether it be video or photo, you are supposed to be certified. How they would ever enforce that, I'm not sure, but that's the way it was originally written, to my understanding. So a lot of my stuff has just been out playing around and getting lucky and trying to get better at flying the drone and whatnot. Luckily, like cameras, those keep progressing and kind of take all the work out of it and recover on their own pretty easily.
For sure. So you aren't shooting many drone photos at the moment or lately?
No, it's probably been over a year since. It was probably last summer since I last had my drone out. I had contemplated. I recently took a trip and I was over in Italy. I contemplated taking it with me over there because it looked like I could get away with registering it and using it, but it was just more additional weight I didn't want to have to lug with me.
Right, fair enough. Yeah. Do you have a really big drone, or is it just like?
I have the Mavic 2.
Okay.
And so it's not as big as the Inspire, I think, isn't that the big one? It folds up pretty nice, but still with once you start adding the batteries and the controller and everything else, and it was, do I want lenses or do I want a drone? I opted for lenses.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah, I have the Mavic Air, and it's like it just folds right in my pocket. It's like a few grams. It's perfect for what I do, and I do really minimal stuff with drones, but just some video footage and all that. But yeah.
And that's what I was looking at, as well as switching to something lighter like the Air to be able to make it a little bit more feasible to carry around.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, the few photos I've taken with it, it's really good quality. I'm actually kind of surprised. And then, of course, you got that smooth gimbal video footage that works really well, too. But
it kind of feels like cheating, right? Like it's that you can throw something up there that it's made it so accessible. I think it's great. I think we were talking earlier about different in perspective of getting low or in this case getting as high up as you can. So a lot to be seen.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's no secret that I do a little bit of homework on our guests before the recording, but I was looking at some of your photos, and you had this one of a local horse park that you and I have both been to, and just the perspective of these two people on their horses, and it was like midday light, but seeing it from the top down view casted those shadows, and it just I stared at it for like a few minutes. I was just blown away at this perspective. I'd never considered it. It was really, really cool.
That was just a really, really lucky event. That was the Twin Towers Air Park out there, and I just when I was flying my drone around, nobody else was there, and then those two horses and their riders showed up, and they went into opposite rings, and I just couldn't believe my luck. And the sun hit just perfect, and they have you can see when you look closely, you can see the riders on the horse, but then you can also see their shadows, and it kind of plays a trick on the eye of trying to see which is which. What you're looking at, which I love that photo, and then that's one of those that just doesn't convey online, right? Like you kind of need to see it in person or on my website as opposed to on social media, because you just can't see the detail well enough.
Yeah, definitely. It had it's like at first it felt like a two-dimensional thing because I was just viewing it on a screen, like you said, right? But it does have so much more to it, I guess. That was really cool. Yeah, and that's a good segue into the next question I have here, because your website, it's very interactive, which is really cool. Not only do you have prints for sale that viewers may purchase, but you have this augmented reality feature that previews the artwork on their wall. How does that play to factor, I guess, in maybe some sales or just people viewing your work?
It's a little bit of each. Some people have used it and really liked it. It's I think the biggest help is for people understanding size. I think a lot of times when people are buying artwork online, we have these ideas in our head that like a 30 by 40 is this big, but then you realize and you think that'll look great on your wall, but maybe it's not quite the right size, or it's too big or too small for how big your wall is. So that augmented reality piece is a really cool feature to really let you, if you follow the directions and stay at the right distance, really see what it's going to look like on your wall. I think it can be a great tool, and you can flip between different sizes right there. So I think it's very beneficial. So I know some people have used it, and it's helped them pick the right size, and other people completely missed it, and I was like, hey, you could go do this, and then I kind of walked them through how to use it, and it ends up helping them in the end. So it's a nice tool to have, but a lot of people, I think, already have an idea what they're going for.
So how often do you use that feature?
I myself don't use it at all. I've probably, I would say a couple dozen people I've probably walked through the process of using it. One of the shows that I was at, of course it doesn't work too well when you're outside, but I demonstrated to someone just on their phone, so they could see when you get home you can use this and try to see what it's going to look like, and maybe pick the right thing for you. So it's a great feature to have. I hope more sites start introducing that AR capability, because I think it's useful, especially when you're buying something that's meant to be displayed, and you're going to be hanging it somewhere or sitting somewhere in your home. You want to make sure you get the right thing for you.
Yeah, definitely. It does seem like the future, really, with both artwork and just items buying online.
Kind of winding down the episode here. Kind of let us know what's on the horizon for you. Do you have any projects you're working on? Any trips or anything, or what's coming next?
So right now, I'm looking forward to just getting out, probably around Ohio quite a bit this summer. I'm involved with the Clifton Craft House. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's a new kind of co-op that's getting started up in the Clifton area. That's getting started and getting its legs out. I'm a business member there, and it's open for anybody that wants to join at this point. But it's going to have artist space, as well as they will eventually have be having a craft house there, so it'll be having beer and I don't know that they've settled on which brewery yet will be supplying the beer, but so there'll be taps there, and there'll be art evenings right there, and there's a lot of events that Clifton is trying to get going, and so I'm being involved with that, and so there's a lot to be done with that this summer as they gear up. And then of course we've got the summer art season, I guess you would call it, is with shows coming up. We've got I'll be doing the Midwest Native Plant Conference at the Bergamo Center coming up here in July, and then we have the Art on the Lawn in August, I think is the next one, and then there's also in August is the Clifton Music and Arts Fest. So a lot of cool things coming around locally. It's hard to believe we're just about in July, so going to run out of summer quick.
I know, it's been going fast, so yeah, I agree with you there. So yeah, this has been a great episode, Karl. Where's the best place for listeners to go see more of your work?
So I'm known as everything is K Yost Photo, so KYOST photo. Either .com is my website, and Instagram is K Yost Photo, as well as on Facebook.
Awesome. Karl Yost, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the video version on YouTube as well. You can subscribe down below, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.